Welcome to the Equine Vet Connect Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Carter. I'm a veterinarian and a farrier. The goal of this podcast is to educate horse people, break things down, bust myths, and keep it real. Speaking of breaking things down, here's my legal disclaimer to keep my attorney and insurance company happy. While I am a vet, I may not be your vet. Contact them before trying anything you hear on this podcast. Remember, just because you watched it on YouTube or heard it on a podcast does not mean you can do it. Please use common sense. Welcome back to the Equine Vet Connect Podcast. I'm Dan Carter here back at Countryside Equine Hospital in the studio. We're doing another virtual podcast. Today I've got Dr. Kelly Vineyard on with us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Kelly is a equine nutritionist. Kelly, I want to start there because one of the things I've seen is a lot of people call themselves nutritionists, but this is like you are a true nutritionist. You've got a PhD in equine nutrition. You're highly educated in this. You're not just someone who's fed horses for a long time or took an online course. I mean, you've got the credentials. You've got a lot of time in the industry. This has been your life's work. So let's talk a little bit about who you are and how you got here.
Sure. So, I've actually been an equine nutritionist for going on 17 years now.
Oh, wow.
Right. It's kind of hard for me to say that out loud, but I've definitely been feeding horses for a lot longer than that. But I really didn't become a nutritionist until I graduated with my PhD. So, kind of what, that sort of process of becoming a nutritionist entails. I have my undergraduate degree in animal science, so that's a 4-year degree. Then I went and got my master's degree in animal science with a focus in equine nutrition, and I did that at the University of Florida. That was a few years. And then following my master's degree, I did a PhD in equine nutrition and in animal science with a focus in equine nutrition at the University of Florida. That was a 4-year program. So I actually was in school longer than you were as a DVM when you add all 7 years of postgraduate, which, that's neither here nor there. But, an equal amount of kind of concentration on the science behind, biology, nutrient requirements. I actually did a lot of work in immunology too, and nutrition's effect on immunology. So I took a lot of immunology classes in the med school. I definitely worked with a lot of veterinarians at our vet school as well, doing my research and working in the labs. So, becoming a nutritionist is about learning how to learn too. It's not just about learning all the facts. It's about, because things are always changing and we're learning more. So we learn how to do science, how to assess what science is good, what science is bad, and then apply that to kind of real world scenarios. So I think being an equine nutritionist, there's one aspect of education, but there's another aspect of experience too. And same thing with veterinarians, right? When you get out of vet school, you know a lot of book stuff, but then you learn the real stuff, right? When you start practicing.
I always like to say you're not a good vet till you've worn out a few trucks. So,
there you go. I like
same
that.
way in anything,
Yeah. And so for nutritionists, most of that experience will either come through kind of the academic track, so in academia, where you continue to work in academia, or like what I did, I went the industry track and I went to work for a feed company. So doing research and development, doing tech support, training sales teams, and working with horse owners like every single day. And I actually worked for Purina for 16 years. And just a year ago, I left Purina and started my own independent consulting business. So now I'm out on my own, but so a lot of that, my nutrition knowledge comes from just real world experience, but that was built on the foundation of science, right? So I think for horse owners, it's hard for horse owners to kind of know, like, how do you find an equine nutritionist? And I will admit there's not as many of us as maybe there should be.
Yes.
Now, and number one, I think veterinarians are a great source of equine nutrition information. So that's always a great place to start. But then from there, I think it's really important to ask about the credentials of people who call themselves nutritionists. I feel like at least having a master's degree in animal science in equine nutrition is really critical, because that means someone specifically studied nutrition in an academic institution. They have a degree. It wasn't an online course. It wasn't just reading a lot of books. It was under the mentorship of someone that's knowledgeable. And then, I think there's some really good nutritionists out there that stop at a master's. A PhD is a step further, a little bit deeper, doing more formulation type work, medical type work. And then obviously like working with companies, that's where a lot of PhDs end up going. But for horse owners, just asking what are the credentials, and then what's their process? A good equine nutritionist is going to get a lot of information from you, and they're going to synthesize it, and they're going to use science to assess whether or not your horse's nutrient requirements are being met. They're not going to use just their a whim or their opinions. They are always going to kind of go back to the NRC, which is nutrient requirements of horses. They're going to go back to the peer-reviewed journal articles. They're going to go back to years of experience that's kind of rooted in science. And that's how you're getting really, really good nutrition advice.
No, I couldn't agree more. And that having a good nutritionist on the team, I work with a lot of athletes, and sometimes, and I think it's becoming more commonplace now, we're realizing like food is medicine. Food is, what we eat is more than just about calories. Mm-hmm. But when you're looking at horses, especially a lot of athletes, what they consume is incredibly important, because like you talked about, not just from do we have enough weight or are we overweight, but from a disease standpoint, horses that food is part of having a good immune system. Food's important for healing. I can't preach that enough, working on tendons, ligaments, joints. What these horses eat, all that plays a role in how they heal and how they can work. So that being said, I think if I had to title what we're going to talk about today, it'd be like top 5 mistakes in horse feeding, because these are things we see all the time that I think either people don't think about or they think about incorrectly. And so we're going to talk about let's call it the top 5 things that you can do, or top 5 mistakes that you often see when you're doing these consulting projects and trying to help things out. So what would be your the number one thing when you're talking to people? What's the number one thing that you see that if you could fix this, you could help them the most?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And, I've worked with a lot of horses and horse owners over the years, and there are all sorts of mistakes that are happening. And some of them are easy to fix. Some of them are not so easy to fix. But I would say, like, overarching, one of the main mistakes I see is related around forage feeding, and primarily not feeding enough forage, underfeeding forage, especially in performance horse barns, especially for horses with maybe higher energy needs. Everybody likes to focus on the concentrate and the grain and what bagged feed am I feeding? And it's like the forage is an afterthought sometimes. And I can go into a barn and, somebody's having a problem with a horse and they want to immediately say, what feed do I need to switch to? And I'm like, I don't even care what you feed first. Let's look at your forage and let's look at how much you're feeding. So number 1, underfeeding forage. Horse absolute minimum requirement of forage is 1.5% of body weight per day. That's not in flakes, that's in pounds. So you have 1,000-pound horse. Their minimum forage requirement to keep their gut working properly is 15 pounds a day. Now, how much is 15 pounds? I can't tell you that. You really do need to use a scale to weigh your flakes of hay to get a good idea. And every batch of hay is going to be different. Your Timothy flakes are going to weigh something very different than what your alfalfa flakes weigh or your coastal Bermuda flakes weigh. And so what I like to recommend, get a big old trash bag, put a flake in it, get a hanging scale, and say, okay, this flake weighs 3.5 pounds. Maybe weigh a couple more flakes, like as you would flake them off. The next one's going to be 4 pounds. The next one might be 2.5. Get an average of a couple of different flakes, and then you kind of know with that batch of hay at least your flake weight. So you don't have to weigh it every day. Nobody's going to do that, right?
No,
But
it's got to be manageable.
this is like a 10-minute exercise. Know your flake weights. And then you realize, oh my gosh, I'm only feeding, 1% of my horse's body weight per day when I'm doing 2 flakes in the morning and 2 flakes at night. That's actually maybe part of one of the problems I'm having with my horse if he's not holding his weight. Or, on the flip side, maybe you're overfeeding. Maybe you're feeding 3 or 4% of their body weight in hay, and no wonder they're getting a little chunky. So it's just good to know the weight of your hay. Minimum 1.5%, 2% above is better if they can, use the calories. And then, make sure they're getting good quality forage too, which is kind of like a whole nother conversation, but that's just as critical.
Yeah, we did a whole podcast with Stanley on that, because that's one of the first things I look at when I'm in barns. If we're having a nutrition issue, is I love to always say you want to feed the highest quality forage money can buy, and then we'll figure out what our feed requirements are.
Yeah.
But forage is where it all starts.
I will say there, and that I've always said that too about the highest quality you can buy, but there is a caveat to that. You want to I would say you want to get the right forage every time for your horse. So if you have that obese metabolic pony, actually a lower quality forage might be the exact right for him, right? Mm-hmm. One that's a little bit lower in calories, it's a little bit higher in digestible fiber, not too high because we don't want him to colic, but we want it to, so he can still munch and get like the good chewing and get the good fiber in his gut, but not a lot of extra calories. Like a really high quality, orchard grass just would be too much for him, right?
That's one of the things I always think about is the good Lord made them to eat forage. That's how they were designed. And that's a great point, because there are times where, this can kind of lead into one of our next topics when we start talking about these overweight horses and these obese horses. And people, I'm sure you hear it all the time. I just can't get the weight off. And you're like, well, no kidding. You're feeding. I see what you're feeding. This is great hay.
Yeah. That's definitely another very common feeding mistake I see is overfeeding horses. And then, I think the problem there comes from, number one, not recognizing what a fat horse looks like. I think our eyes are especially getting trained a little bit to favor like a little bit of extra cover over the ribs. They look fat and shiny and healthy. And so I think we're all sort of shifting what we think is normal. But there is a body condition score scale, the Henneke scale, from 1 to 9. 1 is emaciated, 9 is like grossly obese. We really want our horses to be around a 5 or a 6. So I would encourage people to go and kind of educate themselves a little bit on the body condition score system. When your vet's out, ask them, like, what would you score my horse at, and have them explain it to you. But you're kind of measuring like fat deposits on the neck, behind the shoulder, around the tail head. If you can't feel their ribs easily, or at all, that's a bad sign. That's a 7 or above. You need to be able to feel ribs fairly easily as you rub along. I'm not saying you need to see a rib. If you see a rib, I always say they're below a 5. Right. If you can feel it fairly easy, they're probably between a 5 and a 6, maybe a 6. If you have to really push and feel those ribs, they're above a 7. And that's obese.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of the 6. That's where I love my horses to live, is right there to 6.
Yeah.
And it can be tricky because it's easy to go from a 6 to a 7. But if they can live in that 6 range, I always say that's like having everything you need and just a little bit of cash in the bank too.
A little reserve.
Yeah, a little reserve in case we get sick, in case we're traveling. We've got a big show coming up. We know we're going to be there for a while. It just gives us a little bit of savings there.
And very interestingly, with brood mares, they actually will. There's been some studies that show they actually have better like rebreeding rates when they're at a 6 and lower than that. So there's some physiological benefits to but then on the flip side, when you have like a race horses, they're actually running at around a 5 or even less than a 5, which is perfectly acceptable. Same way with event horses. You'll see a lot of folks keeping them around 4.5 to 5, and that's actually very healthy for them for the type of work they're doing. So,
Well, I think it's important to really understand that body condition scoring system, because all too often we want to confuse fat for muscle. People
Mm-hmm.
who go saying like, "Oh, look how good he looks. I've got this muscle." And I was like, "No, you just got a really great cover of fat here. It's
Yeah.
fat and muscle are not the same." And I've always thought they need to be evaluated differently. You need to evaluate that body condition score, but then you also need to look at a muscle score.
Mm-hmm.
Where are these horses at there? Because that's two different nutrient categories.
Very, yes. Yeah, and there's a pretty established, body condition score. There are some muscle condition scoring systems out there. There's a couple different ones, but you could, choose one that you like and sort of familiarize yourself with it. I always like looking from behind, like looking
Hmm.
from the tail, so you can see the muscling on the hindquarters. I think that's and like even taking pictures and tracking. I think that's a
Yes.
really good way to do it too. And then top line, obviously, across the whole entire back from the side is another good way to look. And, um, muscle doesn't come from calories.
No.
So that, yeah, if you need to address muscling, you're going to look at protein quality and some things like that.
So when we are talking about these obese horses, because I think about how times have changed. Horses don't do near the work they used to do if we go back 100 years ago. Obesity is a real problem in horses. What are some things people can do when? Because I get that question all the time. I just can't get the weight off. What are
Hmm.
some things as a nutritionist that you talk to people about what we can do to help get the weight off while still maintaining a healthy GI tract and a healthy horse?
Yeah, definitely. Well, it kind of goes back to a little bit number one, know your forage. And I still recommend keeping it 1.5% of body weight, but you're probably feeding more than that. So weigh your hay and go ahead and reduce them down to that minimum 1.5% body weight first, right? Like say you identify you're at 2%. And if they're grazing on a pasture, it's a little bit of a challenge, right? To like estimate intake. Here's you like a really rough like estimate about 1 pound of dry matter per hour on pasture. So if they're grazing for 12 hours a day, that's about 12 pounds of dry matter intake, um, give or take a lot depending on conditions. But just for this purpose, that's one little rough way to estimate it. So get them down to 1.5% body weight in forage. If you need to use a grazing muzzle when they're on pasture, don't be afraid of them. They are your
Yes.
best friend and there is a best friend grazing muzzle, by the way, but they really and truly can be your horse's best friend when you want to still allow them to be on pasture. You want them to have that social herd interaction, but you don't want them to get laminitis. Okay.
Hmm.
And that's what your grazing muzzle is there for, is to prevent laminitis. So, a lot of people are, oh, it's my horse is so sad. It's a torture device. I promise you, it's more torture for them to experience the pain of laminitis.
Yes.
Right. And so
Yes.
I think reducing your forage to 1.5% of body weight, using a grazing muzzle when needed, which is almost always going to be needed if they're on pasture to help them lose weight. And then number three, introducing some exercise, even just 15 to 30 minutes a day, 4 to 5 days a week can really, really help. And then finally, and this is kind of maybe one you don't expect, a lot of times people, when they have an obese horse and they want to lose weight, they just take all concentrate away and they're like, all right, there's no more grain. They're just going to get forage and that they're on their diet. They still need essential nutrients because if they're deficient in essential nutrients, their metabolism is going to slow down. So I still recommend either a really good vitamin mineral supplement like a forage balancer or even a ration balancer that includes some protein, which is perfectly fine. We don't want them to lose muscle. We want them to lose fat, not muscle. So, pound a day of a ration balancer still needs to be a part of their regimen, and that actually keeps their metabolism healthy. Don't take that away.
So, with that being said, like, how important do you feel testing your forage is? Like, as
Yeah, I
far as,
mean, forage testing is really critical because you can't look at it and tell exactly what's in there. Now,
Mhm.
it's not always practical, right, to do it all the time. So, but if you have an issue, right, whether it's carb sensitivities, metabolic, or maybe chronic colic or digestive issues, a forage test can give you so much information. you can look at the quality. So as maybe with an obese horse, if you test your forage and see, look at the relative feed value, that's one of the measures of the quality of your forage. If the RFV is really high, over 100, that might be an indication I might need to switch to a lower quality hay that has a little bit lower RFV, maybe around the 80s or 90s or something like that. Now, for your performance horses or your thin horses or repro horses, higher RFVs are good. Higher quality hays, they're going to give them more calories. Um, but the forage test will tell you, and you may not really know just by looking at it. The other way you can know is varieties. You've got your grass hays and your alfalfas. You've got different types of grass. Some grass hays tend to be more kind of calorically dense, or they have more digestible fiber than others. For obese horses, and you're in the South, I know you're in Georgia, I'm in the South, I'm in Florida, coastal Bermuda grass tends to be a really good hay for horses that need lower calorie hay. It's low carb, it's low calorie. We all know what good coastal is and what bad coastal is. Hopefully we don't want to feed the really fine, maybe it's cut too soon coastal. Those can be problematic, but good quality coastal can actually, you'll hear people, I never want to feed coastal ever. I feed it to my own horse, and I'm a PhD nutritionist, but I know how to recognize good coastal, and he's metabolic, so he needs it.
Well, and when you say coastal hay, that is, I always say that's probably one of the broadest categories in the world. When you look at the number of varieties of coastal hay out there, I mean, what are we up to? Like TIF? I feel like we're up to like TIF 500 or something.
Well, well, thanks to all the good research they're doing out of the University of Georgia on the different varieties.
Go dogs.
Yeah, but you've got coastal Bermuda grass is probably the most common Bermuda grass that's like grown and harvested and sold for horse hay. You'd have Tifton is another one, but you got Tifton 44, you've got Tifton 500, but that is not as critical. I think Bermuda grass as a category is kind of the lower calorie, lower carb hay that's grown really well in the South. Now, if you're not in the South and you're in the Northeast, coastal Bermuda grass may be hard to get. So you have to kind of look for maybe like a Timothy, which is more available up there, but not like a super, super high quality Timothy, maybe a lower quality Timothy. Or, some of these other varieties that are shipped in. Teff would be one example. Those tend to be a little bit lower calorie too, lower carb. I like to test your teff because not all teff is always low carb. So that's another thing to be aware of. But think about it. Your obese horse is eating 15 pounds a day of hay. That's where you have the most opportunity to adjust the calories to help them lose weight, whether it's through changing the variety, changing the amount, or putting a muzzle on them and reducing the pasture intake.
No, that's when it comes to hay, I think the hardest thing in the world to do is look at it. When I was in grad school, I remember I can't tell you how many of those digestibility tests I did, weighing out hays and ground, all those digestion studies, the NDFs, the ADFs. It was the bane of my existence, I felt like. But I can tell you, knowing what you're feeding when that's the majority of your diet is a huge help. And it can be difficult because, some people are set up. I've got some farms in the Northeast I work with, and we're going to go out and buy hundreds of tons at one time. Mm-hmm. But then when you're the person that's buying 5 or 6 bales a week, so by the time you get the test back, you've already fed it.
Right.
So one of the things I tell people to think about is if you have a horse that has a metabolic issue, you need to start considering how can I buy larger quantities of hay so that I can get a test and I do know what I'm feeding before I feed it.
Yeah, it can pay off in the long run for sure.
So that's kind of leading to number 3, because we were talking about obese horses. We're talking about we're going to cut that back on hay. We're going to cut back on all concentrates. And you mentioned we're going to lose some of these essential nutrients. What are some of those essential nutrients that we can lose in this process that you see very commonly that we don't have enough of in a diet?
Yeah, I mean, another common mistake is basically not feeding a balanced diet or like underfeeding essential nutrients. That can happen when you're trying to put your horse on a diet. It can also happen when you're feeding a commercial feed incorrectly and just not following the manufacturer's feeding directions. Because that manufacturer or whoever formulated that feed has very specific goals we're trying to meet to meet those nutrient requirements. I mean, obviously, like protein, fat, and fiber are kind of the macronutrients that everybody's familiar with looking at on your feed tag, and we want to feed enough protein, specifically amino acids. Horses have a very specific amino acid requirement, especially growing horses and performance horses. Lysine, methionine, and threonine are three important amino acids that forages typically tend to be lower in. So that's where these concentrates come in. And then when you look at your trace nutrients, copper and zinc are very important for hoof health, for coat health, for metabolism. Your vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin E, are really rich in like green forage, but maybe in hay sometimes they're a little bit lower. The older the hay gets, the less vitamin A and vitamin E will be in your hay. So having a supplemental source is important for antioxidant protection, for immune function. Those are really critical. So I'm not expecting people to, get a degree in nutrition and like understand like I need to meet every this many grams of zinc and this many grams of copper and this many. But what the easiest way to like ensure that you're doing it the right way is to pick a high quality commercial product, whether it's a supplement or a feed, and feed it according to the directions. So ration balancers are great. They're low kind of input, 1 to 2 pounds a day. That's like everything that horse needs to complement their forage. The thing that ration balancer doesn't have is calories. So if you have a performance horse or a horse that needs extra calories, you choose a concentrate, like a grain-based feed or a pelleted feed, fat-added pelleted feed. Read the directions, look at the minimum feeding rate, which is typically going to be 3 to 4 to 5 pounds a day for your average size horse. So if you're only feeding like a quarter scoop twice a day, so a pound a day of like a fat added feed, they're not getting enough zinc. They're not getting enough copper. They're not getting enough lysine. So if you find that you're feeding really low quantities of a feed or underfeeding, you might want to switch to a ration balancer, and that's going to fix your problem. You're going to get all your essential nutrients if you change that. Another really big common mistake I see is with senior feeds. So senior feeds technically, well, and nowadays there's some modern senior feeds that are coming out that are not complete feeds, but traditionally senior feeds are called complete feeds, which means the forage is built in. So it's like the concentrate and ground up forage, because these horses get poor teeth, they can't chew as well, and they can't digest. So some of these horses eat 10 to 15 pounds a day of senior feed, really like a true senior feed. They need that because they can't eat long stem hay anymore. Well, if you're feeding a senior feed at 1 to 2 pounds a day, you're really underfeeding it based on the way that manufacturer made it. So how do you know? Read the feed tag. Look at the recommendations. If the minimum feeding rate is like 0.6 pounds per 100 pounds body weight or 6 pounds a day, and you're like, oh my gosh, my horse would get really obese if I fed that much, switch to a concentrator ration balancer to make sure they're getting all those trace nutrients. Because if like as a nutritionist, when I formulate a senior feed, if I put in enough selenium in that senior feed to meet that horse's requirement at 1 pound a day, it would cause toxicity in the senior horse. So I'm formulating to that senior horse that needs to eat 15 pounds a day. You're feeding it to your fat metabolic pony at 1 pound a day. He's not getting enough selenium. So just feed the appropriate product, and the way you know is reading the directions.
No, that's incredibly important, because I see, if I had to pick my number one mistake, or I hate to say mistake, but the number one issue I see is I feel like everything's on a senior feed and people don't understand what a senior feed is for. They always think it's about being easily digestible. but there's a lot more to it than that. And like I said, it is formulated to be fed at a much higher rate than we are feeding it at. So,
And I will give you a little secret. A lot of concentrates are easily digestible too. I mean,
right.
most of them at this point.
That's,
You know, our modern feeds absolutely are just as easily digestible as the senior
yes.
feeds are. So that the true senior feeds are more about chewing and less about digestion at this point. So yeah.
No, it's a great point, and I want to talk a little bit about balancer, right, or ration balancers, because I'm a big fan of those.
Hmm.
A lot of times when I'm going in and working with a nutrition problem, I kind of start there.
Yeah.
That's where I start. So I'd love to talk a little bit more about what is in a ration balancer and how people can utilize them in their programs.
Oh yeah, I love a good ration balancer. One of my favorite products, and I feel like there's a place for a ration balancer in every barn probably.
Hmm.
So basically, a ration balancer is really designed to balance the missing nutrients in forage. Your ration that is primarily consists of forage, the ration balancer fills in those nutritional gaps. Now, a ration balancer is not designed to add additional calories. So what does that mean? That means number one, it's fed at a static rate based on body weight. You really don't change it. So if your horse gets thin, you don't feed more of a ration balancer. It doesn't work that way. It consists of a good source of protein, and then essential vitamins and essential minerals, and then some will have some additives in it, like maybe something for gut support or probiotic or something like that. But really, it's protein, vitamins, and minerals formulated specifically to complement, kind of a typical forage program. Now, obviously forage varies. So you can adjust your balancer. If you have like really low quality forage, you might feed a little bit more balance, like feed it on the higher end of the recommended feeding rate, like 2 pounds a day. Or like for me, I have a performance horse. He works 4 days a week, dressage, upper level dressage. He gets a ration balancer, but I feed him a little bit, like 2 pounds a day. Number one, he's a big dude. He's 18 hands. My horse is 18
Yeah,
hands, which is he's a big dude.
he's big.
But he gets 2 pounds a day, and he gets really high quality forage, and he does great. I don't have to feed him a lot of extra calories because he's getting all the calories he needs from his forage. So even high performance horses can do well on ration balancers if their, calorie needs are being met and they're at a good body condition score.
Well, and one of the things, and I bring this up every time we talk about nutrition, the power. We've already talked about it with a scale on the forage side, but I keep a kitchen scale in my truck because I'm
Mm-hmm.
always, people are like, well, I'm feeding a cup of balancer. Okay, well, or I'm feeding
Mm-hmm.
half a scoop. There is
Yeah.
no more variable deal than a scoop. I mean, these scoops change in size, so it's like, hold up, let me get my scale. Let's weigh this out. Let's find out like what a half a scoop is, and it's the same thing as you're talking about with hay. Know what you're feeding
So
and talk
important.
about it in
Mm-hmm.
pounds. Grab a scale out your house, go figure out what your scoop weighs as far as a balancer goes. Know where a pound is. Put a little mark on there. This is a pound.
That's right. Put a little mark, then you only have to do it once. And if you don't have a scale and you're too cheap to buy one on Amazon, here's another little trick. Put it in a little plastic bag, and next time you go to the grocery store, put it in the produce scale. I've totally done this before. Believe me, I've done it. And like
Yeah.
you might get a few funny looks, but at least you get, okay, that's a scoop. It weighs,
Hmm.
half a pound. Oops, I thought it was feeding more than that. A
Hmm.
cup, like, a kitchen measuring cup of ration balancer is about a quarter of a pound.
Okay.
So it's a cup of balancer doesn't cut it, in terms
Hmm.
of meeting 1,000-pound horse's requirements. You would need 4 cups.
So know what you're feeding. Know the
Yeah.
poundage, and then
Hmm.
read the bag.
Read.
Read the
Yes.
the label because it will tell you you're going to need 2 pounds of this a day or a pound of this. Like it's going to tell you what you need, and that's
Yes.
going to be based on your forage too. Because a horse that's eating a lot of alfalfa, that requirement's going to be different than a horse eating a more grass hay. When we start talking about
Well,
protein
and it's It's also going to be really dependent on their what they're doing, like if they're
Right.
at maintenance or if they're exercising, and also if they're breeding. Like a broodmare or a young growing horse is going to be different than a maintenance horse. And yeah, please read those. That's like somebody like me spent a really long time working on those and trying to be clear from a good quality, like reputable feed company. There are probably some out there that they're just like 3 lines, and that's probably a red flag if it's not very clear on how to feed it based on body weight. I would say that's a red flag. But most quality feed companies are going to have a body weight based on body weight, life stage, and then you'll have pounds recommended.
I say this all the time. We're talking about medications and feed. Trust the nerds. There's a nerd somewhere that is
Nerds, I like that.
just has really focused on this. They've got this
Yeah.
figured out. You don't have to be a nerd. Just trust the nerds.
I love
They'll
that.
get you there.
Yeah.
So, and that being said, I think we miss one of the big areas. I think we miss a lot because it gets into more of that micronutrient category. When we start talking about vitamins and minerals, salt, things like that, I think we forget like there's more to it than just calories and protein, but you've also got to have minerals and salt. Like these are not just important to keep your horse drinking, but there's a lot of metabolic functions that you have to have salt for. The entire body, the whole neural system runs on sodium and potassium swapping places. Muscle contraction happens because of calcium. Like, let's talk a little bit about those nutrients and how important they are.
Well, yeah, the one supplement that every horse in the world should be on is salt. Every horse should receive a supplemental salt, and that's because even if you're feeding a good ration balancer, you can't put enough salt in there to meet their nutrient requirements and make it palatable. It would be too salty, and the horse wouldn't really want to eat it. Forages can vary. Some will have enough sodium, most don't. So I don't want to rely on the forages. So, most of us understand, oh, you can throw a salt block out there, right? That's enough. I would say it's a good insurance policy, and I do like having salt blocks available, but horses vary widely on how much they will lick on a salt block and get enough of that good sodium that they need for all of these functions in their body. So we actually did a study of several years ago looking at salt block consumption. Horses need at maintenance 10 grams of sodium per day. And so we wanted to measure, can they lick that from their salt block or not? And out of this test we did with 10 horses, and we measured it over, it was 2 weeks, and took an average consumption rate. Only one horse out of the 10 got the 10 grams a day. So maybe you're lucky and that one horse is getting enough salt, but the only other way to do it is to top dress. So, either you can do that with plain white salt. I like iodized salt because horses also need iodine. And so 1 to 2 tablespoons a day usually is perfectly adequate, maybe 2 in the summer when they're sweating more. But sometimes horses don't like salt. It gets a little salty and they won't eat their feed. So that's where you might go to a commercial electrolyte that has, maybe some potassium in there. It might have some calcium and magnesium in there, but it also has some flavor to mask the saltiness, which is perfectly fine. My biggest tip on choosing a good quality electrolyte is you want salt to be the first ingredient.
Makes sense. Not dextrose?
Not dextrose, no.
Okay.
And there's plenty of products out there with dextrose or sugar as the first ingredient, so avoid those.
I see that a lot. We don't need dextrose, we need salt.
Right. So. And some people will make electrolyte water, right? And like they'll put, and the more sugary stuff, like the water tastes good, and horses, that's what's like driving horses to drink, but that's not what we're talking about. We want a top dress, put the salt in the feed, make the horse, and the horse has to eat it, or else it's for nothing. So.
Well, since we kind of we're heading that way, let's talk about supplements, because we kind of already mentioned it with electrolytes, but I swear I think there's a supplement for everything. Let's talk a little bit of your thoughts on supplements.
Yeah, I mean, so my definition of a supplement would be something that you're feeding that goes above and beyond meeting essential nutrient requirements. So I don't technically count salt as a supplement because I think every horse needs that. So they need salt. Say your horse is not on fresh pasture and they're not getting enough vitamin E in their concentrate, you're going to feed vitamin E. That's an essential nutrient. Like you're feeding an essential nutrient, vitamin E. That's not really what I mean by supplement. When we're talking about supplements, it's something like a joint support. It's not essential nutrient, but we're supporting, something in their physiology, immune support, gut support, stomach, hindgut. I don't know what else, like make your horse fly support. Like like you said, there's literally something for everything out there. So my take on supplements is there is a time and place for supporting a horse with functional nutrients. I call it kind of functional supplementation, very intentionally. There is so much misinformation, so much kind of poorly formulated products, bad marketing out there that it's really challenging for horse owners to sort of figure it all out, like cut through the noise, what's functional versus not. So there is a place for functional supplementation very intentionally, but more so than not, people are way overdoing it. And it's causing nutrient excesses, and it's mostly draining your wallet. Is what it's doing.
I see this a lot. Is we've got a horse that's on a pretty balanced diet, and next thing I look, we're on 17 different supplements.
Oh gosh.
And I'll see this a lot when they're like, he just doesn't have energy. Well, I find out we're on 17 different supplements, and we've got, we got 30, 40 grams of magnesium going into this horse. I mean, just pumping it full. And it's like, okay, you kept adding things without looking at what's in them.
Yeah.
And that can cause an issue. Like I said, you can overdo a good thing.
Absolutely. I call that supplement stacking. Yes. It's like supplement stacking is a real problem, especially when you're not like calculating all of the nutrients like magnesium or selenium or vitamin A. I mean, you can legitimately cause a toxicity. I've seen a vitamin A toxicity with supplement stacking before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it with selenium. That was the one, when the whole vitamin E craze kicked off, everybody's like, oh, we'll just get some more selenium in there too. And of all things, the good Lord knew what he was doing when I ended up being a vet, because I worked for a selenium toxicologist at the University of Wyoming when I was there. And so I got to see firsthand a lot of selenium issues. And sure enough, we start stacking all these supplements. All of them had selenium in it. And we started pushing into selenium toxicity. So it's, like I say, be intelligent when we start feeding a supplement. And that thing.
Ask your veterinarian, I think you guys are really a good kind of first line of defense to sort of help dig through the noise, because you're going to always gravitate towards the science-backed supplements, right? Mm-hmm. The evidence-based supplements, the ones that have some research and that have like a good like reason to be feeding them. I think joint supplements are a great topic to talk about, because there's a lot of research that has been done on joint support and with injectables, for example. On the oral side, not so much. There's not a lot of good data that supports that. So if you're having an issue with your horse, he's, maybe stiffer than normal, or, having some lameness issues, instead of going out and spending, $100 for a month's supply of an oral supplement that you're just reading the marketing, talk to your vet. They may actually have a really good plan that involves maybe a medical treatment that's cheaper and works better.
I say that all the time, but when these joint supplements, when they're actually subjected to a carpal chip model, which is the gold standard for testing, they have shown little, if any, efficacy. Yep. You're spending $100 a month on a joint supplement. I can put you on Adequan. I can put you on Legend. I'm going to save you money, and it actually works.
It's going to work, right?
So I'm not a big joint supplement person, because like I said, the data's not there.
Yeah.
The data's not there to say these are great. And that's the hard part too about the supplement market, is you just got to say that it's safe. You don't have to prove efficacy. And I think that's really important. If you're going to pick one, you need to know if there's some efficacy behind it, real efficacy that says this actually works, done by a third party, a good test, not we called up 100 people that were feeding and they said their horse did better.
Testimonial data is not the same as, biological data. And that kind of leads me, like, there's this framework that we actually came up with when I was with Purina. We came up with this framework called the test ride. And it's a way to assess supplements and like whether or not they're kind of worth considering. So, when you buy a horse, you take a horse on a test ride. Same thing with your supplements. And the RIDE stands for R is research. Is there research in this product, or at least on the ingredients included in this product? Do those ingredients make sense? So, say it's like a gut supplement, but if it has like ingredients that aren't really known to support like, stomach comfort or whatever, like, okay, nope, the ingredients don't make sense, you fail. D is really important, which is dose. So even if it's the right ingredient that has been shown to be efficacious, is that formula included in enough amount to actually have a biological effect in the animal? And then E is efficacy. So like take a minute, put your horse on the supplement, take 30 days. Is the supplement actually kind of doing what you wanted it to do? Like say like a fecal water syndrome, for example, is like a really big issue now people are paying attention to. And there's tons of supplements out there. Like, we're going to cure your fecal water syndrome. Well, reassess after 30 days. And if your horse is still having a problem after this expensive $6 a day supplement that you're feeding, maybe you can take that out if it's, after 30 days. Just don't forget to reassess efficacy.
Well, and be honest when you reassess.
Yes.
Be honest. And remember to reassess. I think that's a big spot too, is you start something and you forget, like, okay, it's been 30 days. Have I truly seen an improvement? Can't picture, like you're talking about fecal water syndrome. I tell people, take a picture of your horse day one, take a picture of the manure day one, and then get out 30 days. Take a picture, put them side by side, be objective. Ask your friend, does this look different?
Yeah.
Know if you're getting a result.
Yeah. Put a reminder in your phone for 30 days, reassess. I think that it's easy to forget. I've been in so many barns and done so many consults where, I get that list of supplements, and it's like my favorite thing to do is eliminate supplements left and right, and, but I'll always ask, like, why are you feeding this and how long have you been feeding it? And there are so many times when people are like, you know what? I started feeding this 3 years ago and my horse had this issue and we just kept buying it and we just kept feeding it. They don't have, things have changed, and it's like they're spending, so much money on the supplement stack and without even realizing it. And I would much rather you put that money into a good quality forage and a good quality concentrate. And then this is a really general rule, but for me, this is what I limit myself to. Because I feed supplements. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, I do feed supplements to my own horse. They're very targeted and with a purpose, but I keep it 3 or less. Like, in my head, no more than 3. And that, even 3 is kind of a lot. But like, if it's like I really like a show and I want him to have a really shiny coat. So he gets his, ahi flower oil to get shiny coat or some sort of, omega-3s. And then, he's metabolic. So I'm feeding him some, botanicals to try to help manage his insulin, and so there's very like certain, but they all have data behind them. And, fortunately, my horse is like pretty healthy. So I'm not having to worry about, muscle stuff or anything like that. But, speaking of which, I do feed him an amino acid supplement because I work him really hard.
Right.
And I know that his muscles are a constant state of turnover, and I want to support him with a research-backed amino acid supplement.
No different than a bodybuilder taking a protein shake. If you're going to build it and use it, you gotta give them the nutrients. Yeah. That's a good rule. I think I'm going to institute that. Is you get 3.
Yeah, so, and I don't count salt in the 3, by the way.
Well, it's not a supplement. We said that earlier. Not a supplement. That's just a nutrient.
That's right.
Yeah. So if you're gonna bring in number 4, then what are you getting rid
of? You gotta really like be strategic and like get rid of something and bring the 4th one in.
So, Well, I'll tell you, Kelly, this has been a great discussion today. We've got some other ones planned. I think we've talked about, so hopefully we're going to get you back on soon. How can people find you? Because a lot of times I'm working in barns, and we need a nutritionist. And so, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you that you can help them with their with nutrition and with feeding?
Yeah, well, so I have a website, equinePhdNutrition.com. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn, just Kelly Vineyard, PhD. And, I primarily work with feed manufacturers, supplement manufacturers, and veterinarians. So, if a horse owner wants help from me, I usually require a veterinary referral because I
Hmm.
really believe the vet's really important in that whole process. But if it's something other than, if you don't need, a vet referral, if you don't have a vet issue, I can refer you to some really good nutritionists that are out there. And definitely a good nutritionist can usually improve your feeding, help you improve your feeding program and save you a bunch of money because they're probably going to eliminate some supplements for you. That's like our favorite thing to do. Um,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, it's all about feeding a balanced diet and like feeling confident about it. Cause I know it can be really confusing, out there, and there's just a lot of, but there's good nutritionists also that work with the companies. So if you have a brand of feed that you like, there's probably
Mhm.
nutritionists that work for them. All you got to do is email them, ask them for help. They're usually pretty willing to do that. Understand they're going to recommend their products, but that's the ones they know, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just the ones they know. And if they're educated, it's going to be good information. So utilize that free resource too.
Yeah, and most companies, I mean, if you go through
Mhm.
and look at them, they've got a product for about everything. So
Yeah,
you got a company you like, reach out to them. They're there to help. And,
that's right.
I tell people that all the time about veterinarians. Like we're here to help. That's why we're here.
Mhm.
And it's the same with a nutritionist. Nutritionists, and even if they're with the feed company, they want to see you be successful. They
So they do.
want to
Yeah.
see that. So. Well, thanks for being here this morning. Really appreciate your time. To all listeners out there, we thank y'all for listening in. April, Casey, thanks for making this possible. We were talking about this earlier, the work that goes in behind the scenes to make these things possible. This is the easy part, right? We get on, we have a conversation, it's great. But the team that we have behind us is really fantastic. So I can't thank them enough. Um, Again, Kelly, thanks for being on this morning from all of us here at Countryside Equine Hospital. Y'all have a great day. Take care.
All right. Thanks.